Welcome. My name is Michael Barba, and we're very pleased to be joined today by Senator Larry Taylor, who's been a longtime leader on education in the state of Texas. I'd like to just jump in, Senator, with a question about teaching and learning. So when we talk about education policy, a lot of times we're talking about all the things that orbit teaching and learning itself. But if we can't understand what excellent learning looks like, it's hard to get all the things that orbit it right. That way we can support teachers and support students. Can you highlight a couple great schools that do teaching and learning really well? What do they do well that helps students learn?
Well, I think it's important when you have that to be able to identify what school districts are doing well or what school campuses are doing well. You have to have some type of an accountability system. You have to be able to measure who's doing what. Otherwise, how do you know who the high flyers are? As a public school, you don't get to pick your students, but we do like to see you do something with the students you have. And so attainment level may not be the same after 1 year of education or 2 years, but did you grow those students? And we have some, examples. One of them I used that I learned during the school finance commission was Blanton Elementary up in Dallas ISD. Blanton had been failing for 3-4 years, high percentage of low income students, 85% plus, and it's just not been doing well. And they'd also done a survey of parents of that campus to see how well do you think your kids are doing at Blanton Elementary, and the approval rate was like in the upper 80s, 85, 88%. I don't remember exactly what the number was, but it was very high. So the parents really had to disconnect what was actually happening in their school. But Dallas ISD implemented a new program to try to get better teachers in the classroom and pay them more. When you identified who your better teachers were, pay them more. But they also went a step further. Rather than just paying them more for being better teachers, or in the old model, you just paid them more because they've been there longer, right? But they actually paid better teachers more money. And then they would even pay them more money if they go in the more challenging campuses. Yep. Blanton Elementary was one of those campuses. Within 3 years of implementing that program, Blanton Elementary surpassed Highland Park Elementary in Dallas ISD. Yeah. Now, Highland Park is like the gold standard because the type kids they have. But for Blanton Elementary, with the high percentage of low-income kids to be up there at the same level as Highland Park shows that works. Yeah. So that was something we learned during the school finance commission. So we've implemented that on a statewide basis. Now it's up to local districts to implement it, but that's working. But it helps show that there are things you can do to improve education. And obviously the teacher is the most important thing you can have in a classroom. Having a very good teacher makes it all the better as far as student outcomes. So we have examples like that down in the Valley. We've had folks come up, high percentage of English second language learners, and they're doing well. Campuses based on their demographics, low income, ESLs, what people told us before we did our grading A through F, although we know who's going to get the Fs, it's all based on your zip code. Well, that's not true. We had a lot of campuses that people would have predicted to be in that low category of a D or an F, got A's and B's. So there are things that you can do to make a difference. It's not just doing the same thing you've always done and not changing. So this being able to identify where your high flyers are, we can actually find out if you're trying this and it's not working, look over at this school, here's what they're doing, look what's working. So we can have people emulate the plans and policies that work versus just keep doing the same thing we've always done and expect to have a different outcome.
Yeah. And in the program where we're providing merit pay for teachers, so the teacher incentive allotment that you led the charge and helped establish in the state of Texas, what is your hope for that in the future? How do we scale that up, for example, or what do you see Texas, what would success look like 5 or 10 years out from now with that sort of program?
What success looks like is more people, higher level people getting into teaching. Right now, if you look at young people going to college, for example, your typical where the teachers come from, if they're looking at potential careers now, teaching in Texas has a pretty good starting pay, like $45,000, $46,000 a year, but it's been pretty flat. I mean, like I say, you get paid for how long you've been there, and there's some things you can do to kind of bump your pay in some districts, master teachers that. But now with teacher incentive allotment coming in, we now have over 1,000 teachers in Texas making over $100,000. Yeah. So if you're a very bright student in university and you're looking for challenging careers and you really like teaching, but you got to make money.
Yeah.
And, there's some trade-offs. It used to be you had to trade off. If you really had a passion for teaching, you had to give up a lot of income to do that, or you had to move into administration. Well, we want our brightest and best to go into education. If they're great in the classroom, we want them to stay in the classroom, not just move to administration. In fact, I would tell you those are different talents.
Right.
Just because you're a good teacher doesn't mean you can be a great administrator, and vice versa. I want people doing where they're the best.
Yeah.
And I think the talent pool will improve. And I think we'll have more and we'll retain more good teachers in the classroom. And that's going to have a great benefit for our students. We've already seen it by the campuses that have done it. And, right now it's by district. They're adopting these teaching incentive allotments, and the state's helping to fund up to $32,000 additional dollars. But what's going to happen is the school districts that are doing it, guess who they're going to get? They're going to get the better teachers from the surrounding districts until those other districts realize, hey, why are we losing our teachers? Yeah. And then what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to implement teacher incentive allotment. Yeah. And so it's going to spread in that manner across the state. Yeah. And in that way, we're going to have better teachers in the classroom. And that's the bottom line. Education is all about students. And what makes a better student is a good teacher. Yeah.
And we're seeing that in San Antonio. So San Antonio ISD is rolling out the teacher incentive allotment. They were one of the first adopters, right? And in talking to the school leaders there, they were saying they were getting calls from surrounding districts, from great teachers in those districts that were saying, hey, I'd like to come work for you. And I'd like to go to like your neediest campuses. So it's a very promising program, and it'll be great to see it scale.
And in the business world, think about this. If you have a real problem in your business, you don't send your newest, most inexperienced person to address that problem.
Right.
But that's what we were doing in education, not by choice per se, but typically what happened is a young student graduates with education degree, ready to go teach. The openings were always at the most challenging campuses because people would teach there for a few years and they'd move somewhere else. Yeah. So who was getting the least experienced teachers? The most demanding and challenging campuses. Yeah. So we're trying to invert that and turn around where the best teachers are going to those challenging campuses, and then let the new teachers go other places to build up their experience and to get their capabilities up. And then they'll be able to go in those more challenging campuses. Yeah. And within a generation, you could have, well, we don't have challenging campuses because everybody's gotten a great education and a good job.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah.
Right? I wonder, after teacher incentive allotment, what other policies is Texas pursuing that we've established in the last few sessions that are promising, that you see as giving you hope for the future?
Well, what we've done for years is we pay school district based on the type of student they have. If you're low income, you get a bump. We had the what's the term I'm looking for the basic allotment plus we have compensatory education. Compensatory education. So we pay them more for low income students, and we pay them more for English second language learners, those kind of things.
Right.
But what we've done now, we have a just CCMR bonus.
Oh, right.
College, career, military ready.
Right.
So think about it. If we're spending $12,000 a year per kid. Over 12 years, that's $144,000. And unfortunately, all those kids aren't post-secondary ready. In fact, a significant percentage of them aren't. So what we've done is once again, we're kind of changed the dynamic. We're going with a college, career, military ready bonus. Yeah. So every child that you graduate who's college, career, or military ready, we're going to give them a $5,000 bonus over what their statewide average is right now.
Yeah.
So actually, what do you want at the end of the 12-year public school career?
Right.
Somebody who's college, career, military ready. So rather than just paying for the type of student they have and just keep moving them through, we're going to actually pay them to do something with that student.
That's a real shift, because the model for generations has been you pay for attendance. The child is there each day, the district gets funded, the charter gets funded. If you're paying for outcomes, that's a big shift.
It's a huge shift.
Yeah, it'll be great to see that, and the effect that it has on increasing outcomes. As you look to other states, especially through COVID, are there promising policies that you see from elsewhere that you would hope Texas would bring here in the future?
Well, as far as COVID particularly, it's still too early to tell. And a lot of our accountability systems are kind of on hold, and I think that's true in other states as well. This has certainly been a shift of huge proportions for education. Now, fortunately, some things we had done in Texas leading up to COVID were very helpful. We had the E-rate program trying to get broadband on all our campuses. We've been pushing technology to get more technology in the classroom, not to replace teachers, but as an enhancement tool. Well, COVID certainly forced that. We now have every student in Texas has a device.
Mhm.
And so to use that as an enhancement for education is a great thing. But now we're in COVID, and hopefully we're in the leading out of it to the very end of it. And now we've got to get these kids caught back up. Many of our students, unfortunately, are facing almost a 2-year lapse. I mean, some schools went so over the top and they stayed virtual forever. And for many of our students, by and large, the vast majority, I'd probably say 90% or more, virtual education does not work for them. If that's all it's going to be, is just virtual education. And these kids really lost. And you saw parents desperately pulling their kids out and trying to find something because they knew their kids weren't doing well. But there are some, glimpses of things that we saw even before COVID that we know are working. I mean, if you look at NAEP, National Association of Educational Progress, it's a nationwide study. It's a sampling they do of all the states. And we've been using that for years to kind of compare. NAEP for a lot of states had actually been plateaued or declining.
Okay.
I believe it was 2 years ago, before COVID, we had a handful of states that actually were bucking the trend, and Florida was one of those. Florida, similar, we have challenging demographics. It's not fair to compare Texas to New Hampshire or some of those other places, but Florida has some challenging demographics as well. So to see somebody that's similar to us in that regard actually going up in their NAEP scores when everyone else is going down, you got to wonder what they're doing there.
Yeah.
And, of course, we've talked about parental choice and things here in Texas, and that has been successfully stalled by those who would defend the status quo. But here's Florida, who has school choice. And, we always hear, well, it's going to defund public education. We're going to demise the public school. But here's the NAEP scores in Florida, where their school choice has been growing over this period of time, and their NAEP scores are getting better.
Yep.
Their public schools are improving. So it kind of goes against what we've been told here in Texas. So I think that's something that's certainly worth looking into. How are they doing that? And for me personally, I've said this for a long time. I think competition improves. It works in every other avenue that we've ever tried. Our country is built on competition.
Yeah.
Things get better when you're having to compete. And I think our public education system will improve. In fact, we've seen that with charters. We hear a lot of people complaining and trying to shut down charters, but the ones that are out there competing with them, guess who's getting better?
Yeah.
The public school, the charter, and who gets the benefit of that? The students.
And we see that with some of the school districts as well. They start to look a little bit closer at the data. So I worked with some people up in Dallas, Fort Worth, and they were saying that they had just established exit interviews with families as they were transferring out, because COVID saw such a big shift in enrollment that they started to say, okay, we need to sit down with these families, ask them what they're looking for in an education, ask them why they're leaving. And then we need to act on that data. We need to take that back and plan schools around that data to make sure that we can meet their needs. So,
which is what you do in business.
Right.
If you're losing customers, you got to look around. Why are we losing customers?
Right.
What are our competitors offering that we're not?
Yeah. And
then you offer it. And then you try to improve on what they're offering. Say, hey, look, we've even got it better than they do. And you get them back.
Right.
That's how it works. And I'm a strong believer that would work in public education. Yeah. And our state would benefit, and our parents and our students. The bottom line is the students, and they would benefit from that.
Absolutely.
Just like we all benefit from our cell phones.
Yeah, we see that all
my dad had
economy.
one of the original cell phones. It was a bag phone. You actually literally carried a battery, and it was about this big, and it had about 25 minutes of talk time.
Okay.
But who was going to talk more than 25 minutes a day when it's $2 a minute, right?
Yeah.
But look where we are now.
Yeah.
And what did that? It wasn't the government. The government was fine with 25 minutes talk time a day and just all cell phone.
Yeah.
But competition drove us to this. And I think we can see that in education. We can literally move in the 21st century in a much more rapid rate than government can ever design it. Let competition loose, and it'll improve education.
And we really need to. Like, we're looking at, if we look back at COVID, say, hope and pray that we're on the end of it. We look back at that. I mean, we just saw with assessments, reading and math proficiency just drop at the fastest rate on record. And so we know that kids need more support. We know that they need learning acceleration. So it's something that we really need to be able to provide them so that they can find the best education in their community.
Yeah.
So,
And like I say, once again, I think we've done some things even leading up to COVID that will help us.
Can you talk
recover
more
from
about
COVID.
that? Yeah.
Tell the technology, for example.
Okay.
You know, for these younger kids,
Mhm.
there are now software games that help teach them reading, letters, math. And if you can trick a kid into playing a game
Mhm.
while they're learning, game over.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they can do their schoolwork and have the teacher,
Mhm.
and then they can have games. You can have competition among the class, who gets to the highest level. And those kids go home and start playing that game, or frankly, even over the summer.
Yeah.
You know, we always talk about the summer slide. They finish up their year, and then they get a summer off. They got to start back. Have them do competitions over the summer.
Yeah.
Use that software. Don't replace teachers, but during the off times, let them play some games and do some fun things like that. And the kids will continue. You may not even have a summer slide. You may have a summer bump
Mhm.
in certain skills that you could do. But these are things you had to have the technology to do it.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of pushback for years getting that, but now it's there. Let's take advantage of it. Let's learn how we can really use it to its full maximum potential and just let it loose.
Yeah. And in the past, you've talked about assessments and how you had hoped that teachers could get real-time data on their students' progress. It sounds like that could be one promising practice to give them that information.
And we've made those changes as well. We're moving to an online STAR test.
Mhm.
You know, unfortunately, the STAR test in some cases is a two-hour plus test. And I've said this for years. At that point, you're not studying testing what a student knows. You're testing their endurance, their ability to concentrate over a 2-hour period of time. That's not fair.
Yeah.
But if you break it down in smaller tests and do it real time, have some at the early part of the school years, maybe some in the middle to measure progress, and at the end, rather than just a test at the end of the year, if you didn't do well, sorry, you missed that year. Let's try better next. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So by measuring as you go along with shorter online tests that they could do without shutting the whole campus down because it's online, you can randomize the questions. So people can be sitting right next to each other taking the test and not, you have to worry about any kind of foul play or anything. It changes the whole ball game. And we're moving to that.
Yeah. And they're also incorporating writing in there as well in a way that we haven't in the future.
And we're getting rid of a lot of multiple choice tests. You know, that's this idea that it was all multiple choice. We've tried to make this, it's been proven to be a meaningful test, but we're making it even more meaningful. Yeah. When people actually have to write an answer, that's when you really measure what somebody knows, and they have to write it out versus pick A through D, or A through E, all the above. And, you know, that's where you really get into knowledge. You can get 20% right just by guessing. There's 5 questions, right? Yeah. But if you got to write it out, there's no guessing. Yeah. And you know what that student knows. Yeah.
It'll be good to see those. Yeah. It'll be good to see that incorporated.
We've been working constantly. We've taken fire for having this test, but you have to have it. Otherwise, how do you know? And for years, we didn't know it. Yeah. You know, I graduated way back when. I won't say, well, let's just say last century. But it wasn't soon after I graduated. We found out we were graduating students from Texas schools that could not read. I mean, I'm sorry, that's shocking. Now, that wasn't my experience for the kids I went to school, but that was happening in the state of Texas. Well, obviously, we cannot allow that to stand. And we weren't spending $12,000 a year, but we were probably spending $4,000 a year back then. And to have kids 12 years later couldn't read, that's before we had any kind of accountability. So we had to have something. Yeah. And we've tried to improve that, and it's a continual process to keep, but you have to have that. Yeah. And these people say we should just get rid of it, quit teaching the test. Well, every kid is graded by a test. I loved it when we went to A through F and it's, oh my gosh, you're just putting all that with one letter grade. And what do you do for a student in your class? Yep. Do you not give them an A through F at the end of the day? So, I mean, this whole idea that A through F was just, before it was what, exemplary and outstanding and, you know, sort of good. And I mean, all this stuff that, frankly, an English second language parent didn't even know what all that would mean. Yeah. So you could kind of get away with saying, well, it sounds good. It's outstanding, or it's good. That's standard, you know, that's good. But A through F, everybody understands A through F. And it put pressure on schools to improve. And I think that's healthy. That's a healthy pressure. And frankly, if you're really scoring terribly for a long time, it's more than pressure. We've got teeth in there. Yeah. You're not allowed to just continue having a bad performance for your students in that school. You know, we had to break that down. Large school districts could hide school campuses that weren't doing well because their overall rating was good. But you had schools, Houston ISD had some high schools had failed 8 years in a row. but they were able to hide that mask over. But now we say, no, you're responsible for every campus has to be over a certain level or it's going to ding your rating. And guess what? Now they start paying attention to every campus.
Yep.
And all this is about is taking care of our students and make sure they get the opportunity to get a great education while they're in Texas public schools.
Yeah. And I think that's a great shift as well, so that there's not just an average given to an entire community. I mean, you have a direct line of sight into each child's performance. Then you can see an individual campus. And then that's also critical for the systems leaders, because if they have that data at their fingertips, they can make decisions about, schools that are working really well. How do we scale that up? If the school isn't at capacity, how do we get more kids in there? So that data is really critical for school system leaders to make, bold decisions as
and
well.
for parents to make informed decisions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and speaking of parents making decisions, so we saw over the last 2 years, one of the biggest enrollment shifts on record, actually the biggest on record. How can we in the future go about empowering families over their child's education? What do you think parents have asked for or have come to expect in the last couple of years that you hope we can put into policy in the future?
Well, once again, I think there's be a pre-COVID and a post-COVID. I think a lot of parents have become frustrated with what was going on their child's campus, for example. And we heard about kids being pulled out, put into pods and different things. We now have virtual education options. The parents have chose to do that because they didn't feel like the virtual that was being done at the school was not being done well. So I think what's happening is you find that parents have now found an empowerment that I don't think they're going to easily give up. So I think you'll find more pressure from parents to be able to have more choices in what their child's education looks like. And I think that's healthy. Once again, I'm a competition person. I grew up in the business world. That's how I learned how to thrive, was through competition. And I think once I've already said, I think it will help in education. I think once parents have seen these kind of things, they're not going to easily give those things up. Whether it's within a district or whether it's alternative to the public education system, I think you'll see a lot more parents empowered and not wanting to give, once you've experienced and once you've tasted it, not wanting to give that up.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if we step back for a moment and think back to your 20 years in the legislature. Is there a flashback moment that comes to you that's just something that, I don't know, would fill you with pride or as you look back at your time there that just, I don't know, brings joy to you?
Well, I must say it's really been a great blessing for me to serve in the legislature. I never dreamed I'd be doing this. I never dreamed I'd be a House member, and then I never dreamed I'd be a senator. So the people I've met, the experiences I've been able to have, and some of the things I've been a part of really are pretty amazing. I think probably the biggest one that comes to mind, obviously, is House Bill 3 that I worked on with Chairman Huberty 2 sessions ago in 2019. And that was, a lot of things we've talked about here today were in House Bill 3. That was a 300+ page bill full of all kinds of reforms. And frankly, in some cases, turning things on their head from what they'd been before, really focusing on students. What can we do to make sure these students all over the great state of Texas get a great education? And some of those things were interrupted by COVID. Trying to get our kids with a 3rd grade reading level at the end of 3rd grade, having these reading academies have been kind of interrupted with COVID, but we're still stressing that everyone who's teaching reading and all of our teachers need to know how kids learn how to read. And so they can implement those practices and make sure our kids get to that very important 3rd grade reading level. So pre-K, for the low income students, having them have the ability to get pre-K, because some of our kids start off with 1st grade, they're already reading. And we got some kids showing up don't even know the letters. And so it's a huge disparity, and it's hard to get that caught up by 3rd grade. And when I keep bringing up 3rd grade reading, because that's been determined to be such an important determiner of a child's success academically. Up to 3rd grade, you're learning to read. And from the 3rd grade on, you're reading to learn. So obviously, if you're not able to read, the read and learn is going to suffer. Yeah. And that's been determined to be a very important factor on how well a child does. And we've got to get focused on getting all our kids up to that reading level by 3rd grade. And so a lot of House Bill 3 was about, but it all, had the teacher incentive allotment, had the college, community college, military ready. It had all those things. There's a 300+ page bill. And I think the most amazing thing about that, and to be a part of that, Your education is also always divisive. There's always factions, even at the local school board level. It's like this. But we were able to pass that bill unanimously in the House and the Senate. So everybody got together, put aside some differences. It was a huge bill, so that not everybody got everything they wanted, and not everybody liked everything that was in it, but the package. Everyone agreed this was an important package for Texas, and they bought in on it and voted for it.
Yeah.
And I think it's been embraced. And, we're still working through some things. Yeah, I want to make sure we came back this session, make sure we kept all that intact, and we also put a large amount of dollars, state dollars, into that bill. Whether it was cutting property taxes, but also increasing funding for education. And we want to make sure that funding was still there in 2021. And boy, during the summer before we came here, it didn't look good. In the peak of COVID, economy was shut down. But as soon as we started opening back up, our economy came back strong. We were able to, complete that funding the way we had promised in the session before. So I have great hopes for House Bill 3. It's not the end all. It's never the end all for education. Education is going to always constantly require change, improvements, adaptations that have to continue on. But to been here to be a part of that was probably one of my most outstanding things that I can say I can look back on with pride and say I was part of that.
Yeah. And as we think back, to House Bill 3, in the session before and in the year before, people were wondering, can we get this done in a regular session without just the focus in a special or something like that? It's such a big task. How do we do it in a regular? But we did it, and in large part because of the work of the commission the year before.
Yeah.
And in that commission, were there moments that, I don't know, really were kind of realization moments where you were sitting down as a commission and something was brought to you that really opened the eyes of the commissioners, that affected the way that you would put together the recommendations? Were there key insights that were offered that really changed the course of the planning?
If you go back to the session before we did House Bill 3, we were talking about spending $1.8 billion additional dollars. And we're just basically putting it in there in the old system. And I just didn't feel like that was good enough. And so I fought for the commission. And a lot of people thought, well, we've had lots of commissions, we don't need to do that. But I must say this commission was different. And it was because the appointments that were made by the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker. They picked a very diverse group of people, really disparate opinions. But that group came together and decided to work for the benefit of our students, to put aside some of their differences and really find that common ground. And I can tell you, going that process, over 100 hours of testimony. But that group distilled around, was it 30 some odd unanimous recommendations? And those recommendations became the basis of House Bill 3. So if we hadn't had that work of that school finance commission leading that session, and I got to remind you, House Bill 3 was done without a Supreme Court requirement. Every other change that's ever been done in school finance in Texas has been because the Supreme Court said you have to do this because your system's not constitutional.
Yeah.
So this was done without that, but it was done with the good work of a commission that was well put together. And like I say, to be a part of that whole process was, really an amazing thing.
Yeah.
But when that passed out of commission unanimously, I think it may have been 43 recommendations. That's when we knew we had something.
Okay.
And then it seemed like it was well received by the legislature when we started. Everybody was on board. We've got to do something with education, and that was just a great process. But just to be a part of that was a blessing.
Yeah. As we look around society and then what's going on in education and what needs to happen in the future, what gives you hope for the future? What signs do you see that you think, yeah, you know what, we keep doing more of that. Let's, I have hope for the students of the state of Texas. What do you see in the society that gives you hope?
Well, look at a lot of things we've already put into place. As long as they're allowed to continue working and improving, I think awareness from people. One, they have the A through F system. They can tell very clearly. It's not hidden somewhere. Some of the things we've learned through COVID, using some technology, I think that's going to help us. I have great hope. But I think parents being involved and seeing it and having a very clear picture of what's happening with their students, and then for the state to keep that watchful eye to make sure we're not falling behind and not becoming lackadaisical. It's a constant process of improvement. It's never over. We can never pass, well, that's the last bill we need to do in education. It's always going to be, what else can we do next? As we learn things. Well, here's a great idea. Hey, let's start implementing that. But you got to have some way to identify who's doing a great job. And that's why some things that are in place are so important that we keep those and we not be allowed to back off of something. pressure is a good thing. And a lot of people would like to just make money and not have any pressure, but that doesn't work. Monopolies don't work for that very reason. There's no reason to improve because it's a monopoly.
Yeah.
But having a little bit of pressure applied, whether it's governmental pressure or competitive pressure, is important to keep improving on our process. And the process is all about making sure our kids get a great education. And I just say real quick, I don't see students. I see family trees. When you look at a campus full of low-income students, every one of those students that you can pull out of that, give them a good education, they go get a great job, guess what? Their kids won't be back in that situation. So you've changed a family tree for that family. And that's what I see when I see public education in Texas. I just see a whole bunch of family trees that we can change and for the better and for the betterment of Texas.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Senator. Thank you for your service and thank you for joining us today for our conversation.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all.